way I think of cognitive liberty is basically the fundamental liberty we need to be human in the digital age.
Do we have cognitive liberty today, though?
Our cognitive liberty has been undermined.
You could imagine a world in which there's these enhancements to improve all kinds of parts of your brain.
It may mean that you will increase the mental capacity of some people over other people.
Would you do it?
If it's safe and effective, sure.
You would do it?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't do what?
Nita, Pedro, thank you. We're very excited to be speaking with you. So I'll start with a question, a broad question to set the stage. I'll throw it at you, Nita, which is, what exactly is cognitive liberty? Can you give us a few examples and explain why it matters now more than ever?
Sure. So the way I think of cognitive liberty is basically the fundamental liberty we need to be human in the digital age. And we can think of that as the right to mental self-determination over our brain and mental experiences. And that is a guiding principle in how we should be thinking about updating our existing human rights frameworks, updating our existing laws, and really how we design features for technologies to assure that they enable self-determination, human empowerment, and the capability of truly being able to form the mental scaffolding of what it means to be able to think and to think freely. And from a human rights perspective, we can dive into what that means. But if we recognize that as the overall kind of update to liberty we need in the digital age, it really helps us think through how to address emerging technologies to truly reap the benefits of them while limiting the downside potential.
And Nita, do we have cognitive liberty today, though? Because obviously social media is nudging us in all directions and preempting some of our thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in many ways, our cognitive liberty has been undermined. It's the reason, a lot of times when a fundamental liberty interest or right is under threat, it becomes easier to articulate what it is. And so, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and probably some combination of both, the ways in which we've assimilated digital technologies, everything from social media to the ubiquity of being connected to devices at all times, they haven't been designed in ways that really focus on trying to foster the building blocks of self-determination. Self-determination theory, which has been around for a while, really looks at the concept of autonomy and competence and relatedness, and how those are core, kind of fundamental pieces that we need to truly be able to exercise our capacities for thinking, for experiencing, for flourishing in the world. And if you look at each of those capacities, digital technologies have in many ways been designed to undermine them, right? Autonomy by having you be addicted to and constantly engaging in ways that, are not what are aligned with your interest, or competence with the increasing push toward offloading our capabilities rather than building our capabilities. And then relatedness, it turns out it really matters to have in-person connection, that we see neural synchrony when people are together, and we see it interrupted every time we get on a device and put it between us and another person. And so across the board, the building blocks of what it means to be human and what it means to have cognitive liberty have been eroded. And on the other side of it, the kind of ways in which we've approached the rights that individuals have of collecting their data, meaning they don't generally have rights, of collecting their data and then using that to target them with recommender algorithms and steering behavior, undermines as well our cognitive liberty. So I'd say both on the right side and on the cultivation side, cognitive liberty is truly under threat in the digital age rather than being promoted and celebrated and secured in the digital age.
Of all the cognitive rights, Pedro, which one do you personally think is the most important and why?
I think that the most important one is the sense of agency. That means that the subjective feeling that we are in charge of our own determination, behavior, decisions, and thoughts. That we are free to establish any mindset that we want without external influence. Although this is very subjective, it's important to point out that despite the fact that we are free to think everything, our thoughts and our view about the world is shaped by our social environment. Uh, the way a person feel and think in the U.S. is different from somebody in Japan or in Iceland. Yeah. So while we're free, or the important thing I would say is that we have this subjective experience of being free, of being the master of ourself and our behavior and our thoughts, and that's the sense of agency.
But Pedro, what if it's subject? Okay, so let's say we're subjectively free, so we feel free, but what if we aren't free in
Well,
reality?
we are a physical system. Our brain is a physical system and it's physically determined. So what happened in the brain is not a chance. It happened with particular processes. And but we know, right, that despite that fact, what make us feel human is this sense of freedom, of thoughts, and so on. So independent of what the mechanisms that are operating in the brain, is the subjective experience the important thing that has to be protected.
So life without cognitive liberty in your mind would be people feeling that they do not have agency.
Basically, that we are robots, that everything we do is basically commanded or is the result of a particular process external to us. We
Nita,
stop
do you
being
have any?
human, basically.
Right. How do you think about that, Nita, from your perspective?
I think what Pedro's really getting at is autonomy, right? Agency and autonomy are really deeply intertwined, and it is the core one, right? If you look on any theory of self-determination, the first and most important piece is autonomy, and that is the sense of agency, the sense of control. But it's a little bit more than that. It is our experience of self-reflection, the kind of metacognitive capabilities that humans have to be able to reflect on their own experience and to reflect on their own wants. There was a famous philosopher, American philosopher, Harry Frankfurt, who tried to help us understand this in a framework looking at wants and wants of those wants. So, first order desires, many of those we don't have control over. Like, I might want chocolate in the sense of I crave chocolate, and maybe that's because of my environment or genetics or some combination of them. But I'm also a migrainer. And as a migrainer, I don't want to want chocolate. And that higher order, that second order capacity to reflect on my wants is what makes me human. And when that piece is robbed of you, when your want of your wants is interfered with, or maybe you even know you don't want to want chocolate, but your capacity to do otherwise is overridden, your autonomy and your agency are really robbed from you in many ways. And we see that a lot with social media, the way that it is designed. Like you might go into a time looking at social media videos and you think, okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes on this. And an hour has passed, even though your want of your wants is to be time limited. You want to have self control. You want to do other things. You want to spend time with family, but it's designed to keep you engaged and to have you sense like lose your sense of self-control that overrides that concept of agency that Pedro's talking about. But just because it is a core feature doesn't mean that the other two building blocks aren't critical as well, which is once you have that basic centering in the body, you need competence and you need relatedness to other people. And to Pedro's point, we are social, right? Our autonomy is relative to other people. It is in relationship with other people, and it is in definition with other people. So autonomy, in any sense, is a relational concept of autonomy. It's not an individual and solely individualistic concept.
How do these technologies affect our competence, Nita?
Well, it can do so in good ways and in bad ways, right? And in good ways, it can. So, for example, suppose you use neurotechnologies to improve your focus or improve your mindfulness and meditation. These are things that can help improve your competence because it gives you some of the capacities to have longer and more sustained attention or be able to recognize when you have excess cognitive load and work into your work stream basic brain breaks, which can be helpful as well because it can allow you to work more effectively without having this kind of cognitive stress that gets in that way. But when you are consuming and especially over consuming technology, so for example, if you're on a social media platform that has short form videos and you're passively watching as it loads the next video, and it quickly figures out, based on your swiping through the video, what keeps you locked and engaged and what doesn't. There've been a lot of neuroimaging studies that have been done that actually show that decreases your self-control, your capacity to actually exercise that want of your wants, puts you into more of a passive mode, which can decrease your competence overall. And then when we look at the newer iterations of technologies like generative AI and chatbots, what's happening is we see increasingly people relying on what were kind of core competence skills, being able to write, being able to generate an outline, being able to generate research or a thought or a plan. And by offloading those capabilities to another system, we start to see a decline in the capabilities and the skills. And, that's been long documented in more narrow areas like the Google effect, which is when people stopped, retaining as much knowledge, but learning more where to retrieve it. The same now we're seeing in a more general way, which is general and in many ways more core competence capacities to be able to be self-directed and to be able to think through creatively a problem are being offloaded, which erodes competence over time as well.
I heard that in some parts of the world, people are monitoring their employees' concentration levels with some sort of headset. And whenever the employee loses concentration, they get asked. I don't know how true that is or not, but is that a use of this technology?
Yeah, that typically monitors very large average signals that you can record from outside the head, right? And our brain functions with some rhythms, and this rhythm can tell you something about your concentration level. So that's an example of neurotechnology. And this is things that are concerned not much as what you learn about the employees, but how you use that information to regulate the workers' activity. Anita can tell maybe more
Yes.
about that. But the point is that the neurotechnology that is of that type is a technology that's very crude. You can better estimate behavior by other means, by biometrics and so on. So this technology, although now it's widespread, does not have the precision to really understand what is exactly going on our heads. So the fear that people have that they will reading the thoughts, what I think about my boss, whether I like my wife or not, and so on, are still, very far away, because that level of understanding of the brainstem require not only new technology that doesn't exist yet, and also requires theory about the brain, where we're still far away to understanding exactly how precisely that kind of mental activity, thoughts, are established in the brain. So that's still far away. However, it's extremely important to discuss the ethical issues around that before that technology is in place. If we do it after that, it will happen as it happened with AI, right? That technology was everywhere and the ethics was not still completely formulated.
Right. I guess, Nita, in a world in which thank you, Pedro. Nita, in a world in which this technology gets widespread and more accessible, what do we need as individuals? Like, what would you tell your family members and friends how to think about it? And let's say that people have access to it and it enhances them. Let's say like it helps improve certain things about them, their memory, whatever it may be. Again, how do you navigate that?
So it's not easy, right? Because there isn't readily and easily available information to the public, especially for the adoption of new technologies. And new technologies, especially new classes of technologies, are often introduced in settings where there's entertainment or emotion such that like the real risks of it can be distracting. So, for example, the first place that many people might be introduced with neurotechnology might be in the setting of gaming, being able to use neural interface to be able to play a video game or operate a, little helicopter. They might encounter it if they walk up to a perfume counter and they're told, put on this headset and we'll help customize your perfume to how your brain reacts to the different scents, which is actually a partnership that already exists between L'Oreal and Emotive. Or walking into a store like IKEA, who ran a big advertisement where people were invited to put on a headset that would track their EEG activity as they looked at rugs, limited edition rugs, to see if their brain registered love, supposedly, about whether or not they really loved the rug or not, in order to try to decrease the number of people who were buying it to resell it. And this context where you're distracted from what the technology is normalizes the technology in many ways in people's kind of everyday experience, and they have a positive association with it. The fun experience of going into IKEA, or the exciting experience of going and visualizing a piece of art in an art museum while I got to see my brain activity. And so the risks are not as clearly evident to them about what does it mean to be collecting data from my brain, and how might that data be used or misused against me. Or it's introduced to them in a workplace where they're required to wear it. And to Pedro's point, it's not alone that it is so highly predictive, but when it's put together with all of the other biometric and surveillance technology that's in the workplace, it gives one additional piece of data that, together with the other sources of
Yeah.
data that are being gathered, can give a pretty complete picture of what a person is gazing at, or if they're paying attention or mind is wandering, or if they have fatigue levels or cognitive overload that could be dangerous within the workplace. And so it depends on the setting in which a person encounters it. I'd say if a person encounters the technology for the first time in a setting that is an entertainment based setting, they should really ask
Mm.
questions, right? What are you doing with the data? Where will this go? Don't just think because it's fun that there isn't some misuse or business purpose. Maybe they're trying to build a brain foundation model based on people encountering data in a particular setting. Maybe you don't want to participate in that, right? It's not a traditional research study where you would normally get, institutional review board documents to sign that would really put you on alert. If you're buying it in a store, we're all very used to not reading terms of service and just buying products. And this is a category where I just don't think people should. I think what is really important is there are some companies that are being innovative in this space that are adopting very specific policies with respect to the collection and use of the data, right? They recognize it isn't like, if they have a general policy that is just like a website data policy and nothing specific
Mm.
about the biometric data that they're collecting from their devices, pass. Go to the next company, right? The companies who are being thoughtful and forward looking about it are the ones that we should be investing in, because our dollars can help drive ethical innovation. The future that I see with these technologies is, eventually replacing other input, our keyboards and our mouse, and instead using neural signatures, neural data to drive our devices. And Apple has already shown us that that's happening, because in their accessibility features in May, they made brain signals a native form of input, meaning you don't have to use a keyboard or a mouse. You can use brain
Mm.
signals. And in partnership with Synchron, they've already demonstrated that in action. And so if that's the case, that it's going to be how you interact, you don't want passively your brain activity being monitored at all times. You want some ability to turn it off and on so that it's not just a, you know, neural surveillance state. And that's, I think, the other thing that I would tell my friends and family who are thinking about taking this on is, has the company given you some level of user level control so that it isn't just a listening device where it's listening to all of your brain activity at all times?
It's very important, that thing, because I mean, if a worker is working and uh, the company set up cameras to monitor the behavior, they will be very uncomfortable, right? But people do not understand that maybe these brain devices may be doing something similar. So it's very important that they be aware of this as well.
Let's say there were these implants or headsets that could improve our empathy or our focus. Could not using them be seen as irresponsible? So the flip side of it.
A while ago, there was a study that was done that was very small, right? Maybe not generalizable, but it was looking at whether you could tell the difference between an experienced surgeon and a novice surgeon simply based on their EEG activity while they were performing the surgery. And they found that with a very high degree of accuracy and better than taking the
Mm.
exams, that you could tell it supposedly because um, with the experienced surgeons, it was primarily motor cortex activity. And with the inexperienced surgeons, they were thinking really hard about it. This is sort of the extrapolation and the interpretation. Would that become the new standard by which you would have to incorporate into certifying a surgeon? Maybe, right? I mean, these are all kind of open questions where, if we know, like right now in long haul trucking, one of the leading causes of accidents in the world, not just from trucking, but in general, is drowsiness while driving rather than drunkenness while driving. And to Pedro's point, some of the other technologies right now, like driver assist technology that uses cameras to see,
Mm.
your car with respect to the lines on the road or your use of the steering wheel and kind of micro changes to it, or even changes to your face, can be more powerful than some of the EEG data on being able to track fatigue levels. But as that becomes better, you might be able to test a little earlier, like catch a little earlier in the growing fatigue from EEG data than you can from those other metrics. And when you put it all together, you might get earlier signals still that could then alert a person, give them a little haptic feedback, a big like blaring noise in their car, wake up, right? You're about to fall asleep. And that could avert accidents. If you're a company and you have that technology available to you, and you have truck drivers who are barreling down the highway with these enormous vehicles that could kill people, do you have a duty to have those people wear these headsets because they provide better and more accurate data? Probably, right? And so I think it all depends on the accuracy and the efficacy of what it is that we're using the technology for, as to whether or not it could become a standard of care over time to use those technologies in particular settings.
So it means that we will eventually potentially have to give up the access to our brains, even not for nefarious reasons, but just simply it saves lives, and therefore I need to give my brain access to my company
Right.
because I'm.
Maybe, right? But then, like, there are existing and powerful norms as to purpose limitation and data minimization, right? And so when you say you have to give up access to your brain, maybe the only thing that anyone has a right to ask for in that context is the narrow inference about your fatigue level. There's
Right.
no reason why raw EEG data should be captured and stored. There's no reason it should go anywhere other than device, the actual data, and it can be overwritten on device, where the only thing that ever leaves the device is the inference itself.
Yeah.
And, the only purpose for which it is collected is the narrow purpose that has a strong societal interest in, and a stronger societal interest potentially than your narrow interest in that one
Yeah.
piece of inference. But that requires a lot of trust, a lot of transparency, a lot of auditability in order to ensure that we're getting that balance right if we ever get to the point where we think being able to extract that one inference from the brain is less intrusive to the individual from a mental privacy perspective than the societal interest
Mm.
that's at stake, right? No right is really an absolute right, or very few rights are absolute rights. And privacy is generally
Mm.
considered a relative right, where you have to weigh the interest of society and the interest of the individual. And then you have to find the right balance between them.
Mm. Yeah, there's a different dimension to the idea of enhancement. I mean, when we have the things that we have been talking about is try to help people or try to take advantage of technology to supply from some kind of deficit or need. But in some instances, enhancement also has been considered the augmentation of mental abilities to people that otherwise are, typically okay. And this is hotly debated in ethics because uh, it may mean that you will increase the mental capacity of some people over other people. And that bias may create or disrupt the social tissue in some ways.
You could imagine a world in which there's these enhancements to improve all kinds of parts of your brain, and it's only accessible to the wealthy or to the powerful, and they take off, and then everyone else doesn't have access to the tools, and there's a further concentration of wealth. And
Right.
yeah,
Now, it is true that if you look at the history of technology development, in all cases, the people that have more resources are always the first to get access to that. But typically, then they spread to the rest of the society. The question is whether in these instances that may happen or not. So the equally access to technology is something, it's a very robust principle, but I'm not sure exactly how this can be enforced, right?
well, hopefully the capitalist system will enforce it because there's money to be made in democratizing tech. So the top have it, but then someone's going to make a lot by making it cheap and accessible. And we would hope that the market forces would do that. Great. So would you do it? Let's say that it's available to enhance. You don't have any issues, Pedro, Nita, you're absolutely fine. Life is fine.
If it's
And
safe and effective, sure.
you would do it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't do
And
what? You wouldn't like use an enhancer in any way? Like, here's my cup of tea. You obviously would drink a cup of coffee. I think I've seen you drink coffee, Pedro.
yes, I drink coffee, but the thing about the brain is it's a limited system. It is fully used all the time to do all the things we typically do. I don't want to stop doing the things I do, but if I introduce a neurotechnology that uses or modify part of my brain, something else I'm going to stop doing or stop feeling.
Well, that
Or
neuronal recycling theory has actually somewhat been challenged too, right? I mean, so some people, like, yes, there is some replacement, but they also have found that
right,
there has been, so for example, for a while, people believed that reading overwrote your capacity to be able to tell the difference between faces, that the same fusiform face area in the brain that was an acquired skill of reading meant that people became far less able to be able to discriminate visually. And that's been really challenged over time as to whether or not that's quite true. Now, it's okay to say, I take the precautionary principle, which is in the instance in which it is true, I don't want to overwrite it, but you read, don't you?
yes, but and
So you've
still
overwritten
the
your capacity to detect faces. Like, do you even
right,
recognize me,
no,
Pedro?
but you don't recognize all the faces you see in the world. You don't have that capacity, right? So now suppose that you have a neurotechnology that took additional resources of your brain, which are limited, to see all the faces and recognize all the faces in the world. I'm sure you will do less of something else. I mean,
Well,
we
I mean, so
know
I will
that
just
this.
say that that is a controversial claim, right?
Uh,
But
I,
it's okay. Like, we can each
I think,
decide for ourselves, right? That is
yeah,
cognitive liberty, which is the right to make those choices for yourself, which is you can look at the evidence and say, to me, the cost is too high, right? And Joel's question is, would you do it? And so I think it's perfectly fine to say
right,
one wouldn't do it or one would do it for whatever reasons they would
right.
have.
I likely for my kind of thinking, I think that this will is very hard. So what happened in the brain is that the more detail you want to know what is going on and even to modify, the more you need to know about that specific brain. Because the more local you look at the brain structure and function, the more is different among different people. So the technology faces a technological issue that in order to intervene Joel brain and read his thoughts, I need a model for him, which is a different model for your brain or my brain and so on, because the diversity on the structure of the brain is so high that the ability to have the knowledge to actually get to that level of detail, to me, it's so far away that I wouldn't live to see it.
Nita, Pedro, I wanted to thank you for a very interesting conversation about a very pressing topic that we'll hear a lot about in the coming years. And thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Joel.